So I'm here with Ryan. Some of you may remember I had more than one, I think, really interesting conversations with Ryan some time ago when I'd just come back from the States when Soul Story was out, and Ryan actually filmed a couple of interviews, including one with Ken Wilber for me. And we had a whole conversation about the philosophy I was exploring, and they were very popular because there was some great issues were raised, and all and that brought out the ideas clearly, I think. I've now got my pod book, which is the follow-up to Soul Story. 8 years later, has hit the YouTube as a video series and a podcast audio series, and sent it to Ryan to get his opinion, see what he made of it. And so we thought, well, let's film the conversation because I've got a hunch it'll be interesting again, and just see where it goes. So, hi, Ryan.
Hi, thanks for having me, Tim. Glad to be talking to you again.
What did you make of it? Let's just kick off and see where we go.
Great. Yeah, so our last conversation, we really were in ontology for about 3 hours, if I remember correctly. And in a lot of ways, our positions are still similar in terms of, I'm coming at this from a metaphysical idealist perspective, and you're coming at it from more of a naturalistic progression that emerges into this flowering of God. And so it's interesting to see how we've both maintained a similar position, but now we've come to elaborate on them. I would say both of us have. And what I appreciate most about your theory is that, first of all, if I had to pick an emergent position, it would be yours because it's the most I mean that sincerely.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
I've studied it, and a lot of the positions really fall short because they don't account for psyche. They don't account for those experiences on the fringes that are real, but they're not, bona fide scientific mainstream data, even though they are scientific occurrences that can be studied, like a near-death experience or a psi sensing experience, as you put it. And you account for it in a way that is much more satisfying. And I think that that integral work that you're doing is really important. So I love that part of it. Ontologically, I think you and I have a tension because I'm still partial to the idea that it's hard to explain how consciousness emerges, right? So, if we go back to Chalmers and the hard problem of consciousness, I found that to be somewhat intractable in a materialist origin story. I think you disagree there, and I know you disagree there because of what your pod book is talking about. So that's where I'm coming at it from. But in terms of the evolutionary themes that you've laid out within the universe, we can get into how it started. But in terms of the progression of sensing to emotion and psyche to, I think there's something really poignant and important there that you've highlighted. And I think it would be foolish to assume that the human species and the human psyche couldn't develop a more advanced toolkit of spiritual skills. I think, if we assumed it just stayed the same the whole time, then we've got sort of a stagnant story of the universe. So I think the progressive adaptive creative story you tell about the universe is really refreshing and lucid. So I'll just leave it there for now. That's my early thoughts.
Well, I'm very touched that it holds together for you. Yeah, so I think what's happened since we were together is that I think I've tightened it up a lot. So I think there's a much more robust theory of consciousness, which we can get into, which I don't think the hard problem of consciousness comes up at all with it. And we can just maybe touch on that. And I also think that in Soul Story there's the kind of vestiges of idealism and panentheism, which is my other books are full of. So that's for anyone listening who thinking, what the hell's that? It's a simple idea, which is that Idealism is the idea that this is all in some form of consciousness. There's various ways of understanding that, and I had that view. I now don't think that's how to understand consciousness at all. And panentheism is the idea that there's kind of God at the beginning, but that God is a formless potentiality, which then issues forth the universe. So the universe is both before and God is the universe, and then comes into self-knowledge as a greater God. And you can see that in kind of like Hinduism, from Brahman seen as nirguna, without qualities, to becoming God with qualities. And I think that's all entirely wrong too. And that would have been my position, and that's left over. So I play the classic sleight of hand in Soul Story, because I use the word spirit. I took it from it's Hegel, really, but I was also influenced by Ken Wilber, because you don't know what it is. But it sounds kind of like God, and it's at the beginning, and I've really gone into that now and cleaned it up and just gone, look, there's completely all of these words which smuggle in things at the beginning. I want to get rid of those. The story I want to explore is, what if everything that has any quality whatsoever is part of one process of becoming? Because if we could make sense of that, that would be extraordinarily elegant. So consciousness is a quality of it. It's not nothing. It's a big thing, actually. So for me, that's going to be something which will arise in that process of becoming. And spirit, if it has no qualities whatsoever, why call it spirit, or why call it God? Why not just call it, well, the word I've ended up using is being. Well, yeah. I mean, hydrogen is the first material form, well, one of them. But yeah, so why not just call it being? Because its only quality is that it exists. So I've moved there to the idea that the ground is not consciousness, but rather that if we're going to understand the simplest thing, actually we need to do it with maths. And that maths is describing the very simplest level of differentiation. That's what it is. So when I say the one is in relationship as two, I mean one and two. And so that oneness has got no qualities. It's undifferentiated, and the two is the differentiation.
And there's a beautiful symmetry in your thinking there, because you do lean on that AI analogy.
Yeah.
And so the binary ones, I mean, at the root, computer systems are binary. I mean, even AI algorithms are binary at the root. So there's a consistency in your philosophy from ontology to epistemology that I appreciate. I don't see it as a ones and twos at the beginning. So, but we can get into that more. But one thing it's worth differentiating is that the difference between pantheism and panentheism is probably important. Like pantheism would, and I know you know this, just for the audience, pantheism would be like that. You're God, I'm God, the tree is God, the bugs are God. It's all just God in Ram Dass says God and drag, right? Richard Alpert Ram Dass, he always called, we're all God and drag. That would be kind of a pantheistic. I think panentheism, if I'm not mistaken, there's a degree of separation between the creator and what's created, but there's still
it's not. I think that the difference is that the historical most famous roots is Spinoza for pantheism, and that's where you get. I mean, there's other roots too, but that's where you get the idea that, look, what's God? God is everything. God is the universe. That's what God is. And my problem with that basically is, and I have this often with things, is like, well, what's the word God doing? What work is it doing? It's not doing any work. You're just going, the universe is the universe. It's like,
exactly, circular reasoning.
Because God has to have a different quality if you're adding something to say God is universe. So, and panentheism does that, and I associate that with people like Hegel, but also with some of the Indian traditions and Gnostic traditions I've written on, which is that there is a God at the beginning, and it's issuing forth the universe, which is a manifestation of God. And then if you, for a lot of the evolutionary thinkers, which obviously is quite modern, quite recently, they're panentheists. I was, because then it's like, well, and God is evolving. God is coming to know himself or itself.
Yes. Yeah. But I think if I'm not mistaken, that God it's like the universe is issued forth through God and panentheism, but God is it's almost like a degree of separation where
Oh,
God
God is
creates
also
it.
outside. Yes,
Yeah, that's what
God is
that's what I'm trying to say.
transcendent. Is
Yeah.
transcendent and immanent.
Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. And I
Yeah.
think if I had to pick an idealist position, it would be a panentheistic idealist.
Yes,
Because yeah,
that's what I was.
yeah. But even my ideas are changing. You know, I published an article with the International Journal of Jungian Studies a few months ago on consciousness, and I looked at, you know, how can we get a better origin story for Jungian psychology, and I wrestled with some other scholars in the field, and I had some breakthroughs, but even since then, it's changed, and I resonate greatly with what you've shared about being an open system as a philosopher. It's being willing to grow, being willing to change, being willing to push ideas to morph them into something new. And I see that process happening here with your
Yeah.
philosophy, and I really love it. It's a lot of fun.
It certainly has happened. My God, when I think, you know, and it's dangerous. It's fun and it's dangerous though, because you do, you know, it's been a hell of a journey, especially in my 60s, to just go, oh, you know, I think what actually happened for me, and you know, this is just the origin story of my philosophy, is that I I started by looking at the perennial philosophy, very influenced by the perennial philosophy, which is idealist really, and going, oh look, there is a perennial philosophy, and you can see it in Taoism, Zen, and Hermetica, and all of these, and writing all these books, and then getting to the point of going, I wonder if I could write it for now, because all of these people I love, they've reinvented it for their own time. Maybe I should have a go at that. And that led to Lucid Living, this tiny, tiny little book. And honest to God, for me, I think what I did was, I think I did a really good job. I think it's a great book. And I think I said it so clearly for myself that eventually I saw what was wrong with it. And that's when I went, oh, okay. And because I had, by then I was trying to integrate it with an evolutionary understanding, that's when I started thinking, oh, I think the evolutionary understanding is stronger, and I think it needs a different ontology.
Yeah, I get it. And if we could just briefly touch on logic 101, just for the audience, you know, an argument can be valid. And then the next question is it true? Like, I think you have a very deductively valid argument.
Okay.
You know, if your premises are true, your conclusions follow.
Yeah.
And I think the question of, or you know, whether or not it's true is important. But it,
Yeah.
you know, just in terms of aesthetically, you've built an aesthetically robust argument. And I think where I would push is okay, let's look at the premises. Okay, what do we mean when we say that consciousness has emerged? You know, let's take that apart. And then there's other things that you say that I'm just curious about. Like, you know, you in your rhetoric, the scientific worldview almost has a personality, and it, you know, and let me tell you what I mean by that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It
Yeah. I like.
it says, you know, that no, the universe is just this way, and so the universe is just material that has become you know, advanced enough so that psyche has emerged. You know, there's a, or is it, you know, you could be an illusionist and the psyche just it looks like a psyche's there, but I know you're not that way. But
No.
some people, you know, some people think that they say the psyche is just a kind of this secretion that
Yeah. I'm not. I'm
it's
definitely. I'm not
arbitrary.
saying any of that.
No, you're not.
No.
But if I'm not making a straw man here, so you know you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what I have seen is that you attribute to science almost as if science has a philosophical position, and so it's like science believes that you know everything's matter, but that's not true, is it? I mean, does
I
science have a belief? Does science have a assumption about? Science describes what happens, but not necessarily why it happens, or you know,
I've tried
you
not.
understand.
Yes, I do completely. So there's a few things there. I really like what you said about look, what's your premise? And my premise isn't that that consciousness has arisen. That's not a premise. That's a result of the premise. The premise
Uh-huh.
is what if everything's one process of becoming, and then I think with that, and how and what that would mean. And we should talk about what the different premises could be. And I'm certainly keen to explore then, well, what's the most plausible and the most part of that plausibility is what's the using Occam's razor, what's the simplest way that we what's assuming the least in the premise. So I think that would be a good conversation for us to have. With the thing about science, no, I don't think that at all. What I've tried to say, maybe I've said it clumsily at times, I'm sure I have, but what I'm trying to say is there is a position which is often associated with science, which is reductionist and determinist, and I think that is completely wrong. Okay. You haven't said this, but an awful lot of people, one of the comments I get all the time is, "Oh, Tim's become a materialist." And I have to go, no, I'm not materialist at all. Not in the slightest. I am not going the whole universe is just matter or anything like that. I'm saying there is a process of emergence, the simplest form, the simplest level of which we can understand, and here I am influenced by physics, as information, where information is the differentiation of the one, where the one has the one quality of being. And that differentiation has moved on to all of these levels, which cannot be reduced to the lower levels. That's the whole point. So that what is this? Well, it's exactly what we think it is. Look, it's full of love and music and feeling and then psyche and God, and all of that cannot be reduced to matter. The whole attempt to do so is utterly ridiculous. But there is a level which is matter, but there's a level below what is matter as well, which is not matter. And matter is an emergent, like everything else.
Can I ask a qualifying question?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's absolutely no. Ryan, interrupt as much as you like. I'm absolutely fine with that.
Okay, you're very gracious. So I get what you mean by catching me on. Is saying consciousness has emerged? Is that really a premise in your argument? But certainly it's a premise that it can emerge. Because the whole idea of the argument
it's not a premise.
Well, just bear with me here. Maybe,
okay, sorry.
Maybe you'll correct me. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Okay. But I'm just thinking through this with you.
Yeah.
But what I see is that at the very base of your origin story is the idea that emergence exists. Like that has, certainly it seems to be a premise in your argument
that's the becoming. Yeah.
And so, but embedded within that is that there. And maybe this is an assumption, or maybe this is just where I'm not understanding your argument, because your argument could technically risk being circular if I'm right. If indeed the idea that consciousness can emerge out of matter is embedded in the foundation of your argument, then we would have an issue.
I don't think that's true. I don't think consciousness emerged from matter.
So. Okay, start there. Because I went through your book, and it seemed to me that was a premise.
So that's the hard problem right there. How can something? I'm experiencing psyche. I'm experiencing a non-material world where I can imagine. I can imagine speaking to myself. I can have dreams. I can know God. How the hell did that come from a piece of meat or a whole load of chemicals? That's basically the hard problem, obviously. Okay.
Yes.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
What I'm saying is that that everything is on the fundamental level, we can see it as information, which is the differentiation of the one. And that the most primal piece of information is, as you just said, the bit, which is this or that, which is relationship. So we live in a reality which is relational, and everything is relational. The obvious things, time, space, all of that. But you are relational, I think. I am relational. I don't exist as Tim on his own somehow. I'm always a system in relationship to the universe. Energy is relational. Everything that exists is the emergence and the evolution of relationship. So matter is also relational. That's what we see with quantum physics. Quantum possibilities don't become actualities unless they come into relationship. That's the whole idea of relational quantum physics. Everything is relational. So what I'm suggesting is that when we get material systems turning into living systems, that's a level of relationality. And that living systems are going to start registering with what we call the senses. and which is a way of reading things that are out there, light and sound and so forth. But material systems have been registering things. They're also in relationship, which is why you put two chemicals together and they explode. You put another two chemicals together, they bind into a compound. Everything is in relationship. So there's nothing that's all the way through. What's going to emerge is, by being conscious, first of all, before the psyche, just on the level of the senses, is the senses exist as one system reading the reading and responding to its informational ecology. Well, that's been there since the beginning. It hasn't suddenly arrived. It's just developed, become more and more sophisticated. And then it seems to me that what we mean actually by consciousness, if we go to the root meaning of how we use the word, is we do that at a certain point, living systems, human beings for sure, develop the ability, way before human beings, but we have the ability to process an awful lot unconsciously, which is happening all the time, huge amounts, and then wherever we put our attention, we process it in, if you like, high definition. And that's what we process consciously. So right now, I am processing you consciously. I've just felt my bit of cool air on the back of my neck, which has come from the air conditioning, which I was unconscious of. Now I'm conscious of it. And wherever I put my attention, and just as a matter of interest, because I know you're a great, you have great knowledge about Carl Jung, I think this is absolutely in line with what Carl Jung describes as what he means by consciousness.
Oh, absolutely. You're right. And I actually disagree with what he means. I don't agree with his definition of consciousness.
Right. Now, the key thing with the word, and this is key for us, but it's also key for anyone listening to it, is that it's a real problem word because it's used to mean so many different things.
It's a real problem.
So I'm quite happy to try and avoid it and just go, what I'm describing is everything is processing its environment. On the level of biology, that develops into the ability to process what we call the senses, light, sound, touch. That becomes, because we're taking in so much information, not we, but early life forms are taking in so much information, it becomes evolutionary advantageous to only process what matters in high definition.
I mean, I think that's it.
That's
I mean, if we accept your definition of consciousness, I would think of that as metacognition or a higher phase of cognition, personally.
Okay, well, we can call it that.
Self-reflective awareness, but it's not the same.
I don't think it's self-reflective awareness. So I would like to make a clear division between those forms of life which seem to be like the plants outside my window. They're sensing the light, but they don't, I would not say...
They're not aware they're doing it.
They're not aware they're doing it.
Yeah,
then you've got the birds, and they look to me like they are aware they're doing it. And then you've got other forms of life, maybe the birds as well, but certainly human beings.
I think they're aware something is happening, but I don't think they're aware what they're doing. I don't think a bird's like aware, like in the same way, like we're aware that we're having a conversation right now. I don't think a bird has that level of metacognition, but I think it has the...
You'd be surprised. I watched a very interesting video just yesterday of a blackbird literally pushing and encouraging by pecking it a hedgehog across a road so it would get off the road. So
I think you misunderstood me.
Oh, sorry.
I agree with the intelligent cognition of animals,
right.
And I agree that they have the ability to focus and pay attention.
Okay.
What I'm saying is, so what I'm saying is there are gradients to cognition.
Yes.
And that we have a level of cognition which is narrative, what you would call psyche. I think you would say there's a psyche that has emerged at our level.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is that at the peak of that ability, human beings, as far as we're aware, we are at the peak of that ability, that cognitive awareness. But as you go down in the phylogenetic tree, there are different levels of cognition. And what I'm saying is that in an animal, like a bird who's very intelligent, they're able to problem solve, they're able to focus, they're able to direct their attention in very specific ways, but they wouldn't have that sort of hyper-linguistic or hyper-imagistic awareness of what they're doing and why they're doing it in a narrative sense. That's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you for clarifying that. Well, I agree completely.
Okay.
So for me, it's like break the so-called hard problem is like there's meat, and then bang, there's consciousness. But my approach is, look, there's relationality all the way through, and then step by step, that relationality turns into basic sensing. I mean, like I said, the plant can follow the light. That's going to become the ability to focus when you need to, and that's obviously again a gradient that increases and increases, and then that is going to turn attention on the processing, and then you've got that
Mm.
processing, the processing high definition, and that's going to give rise to what we call the psyche or the soul, which is experienced as images or copies of our sensory experience, and that's going to turn into a whole domain. And in that way, there is no hard problem, because everything has been a step of the development of the system in relationship with its environment.
So let me reflect and make sure I'm understanding your argument, and then we can unpack the progression of
and where you see it differently, Ryan, and how you would what wouldn't work for you.
So it's not that matter has somehow become conscious. That's not what you're saying.
Not at all.
You're saying that ontologically, relationship is primary.
Yeah.
That's number one, is that the universe is relational.
Yeah.
And that's the basis of the whole process of becoming, is relationship. And so
it is the first becoming. It is the foundation. The foundational becoming is the one becoming too.
And so could we call that some sort of relational ontological status, or is that, is it that your primary starting point is relationship, or is there something before? Okay.
Yeah.
So actually that's very helpful, because just in listening to the pod book, there's just times when from my listening that it's just, and maybe it's because I've been so inundated with these, annoying materialistic arguments that I hear certain words and I assume that that's what you're talking about, when really you're trying to say something different. But you're trying to say that these relational dynamics are primary, and out of relationship flowers the becoming of even God, for example,
Everything.
this super consciousness. But you start with the idea that relationship in and of itself, prior to anything that we could say, anything, quote unquote, any material thing, even hydrogen, relationship is prior to that.
Way before.
That's fascinating. Now that's very helpful, because when you talk about, when you kind of hone in on hydrogen, it has certain connotations when you do that, Tim, that kind of alert me.
I know. You probably find this yourself when you do things. People hear things differently. So the hydrogen thing, it's a gag. It's, for me, it's just a gag. It's like
I wish I would have known that.
It's just.
I'm glad I know now.
I mean, I'm serious. But it's like, okay, so what, and it's not only a gag, it's a stolen gag, because it's stolen from Brian Swim. And it just made me laugh so much, because his line, I don't know if I quote him, but his line is, the early universe, the material universe after the Big Bang, is mainly hydrogen, bit of helium. And so that's mind blowing for people who don't realize that. That's like, wow. So, this was just gas once. And then what he says is, what have we learned? Well, we've learned that if you take hydrogen and you wait long enough, it learns to sing opera. And I love that, because it just blows your mind. Now, but that's not because I think it all starts with hydrogen. I think it starts way before hydrogen. Hydrogen's just the thing which people are saying around after the Big Bang.
Well, now I have a whole new appreciation for your position, and even a greater respect for what you're trying to say in terms of its intellectual power, but I still want to unpack some of the issues. So this this is almost like a process philosophy going on here. There's this this relational becoming. So when you get to the level of God, right? And so like you accept the idea that the universe could advance to this super consciousness that has its own identity. Is that correct?
Yes. So
does it care about us? Does it?
Yes.
Is it like, Ryan, I'm going to help Ryan heal, and I'm going to help.
I think it's doing that right now.
So
in fact, I think it never ever stops.
So I guess what drives me a little crazy is I maybe this is just pure emotional reaction is I don't like the idea of an AI analogy. It's like when I think of like a human being or an animal or the beauty of life, which is so dynamic and so non-linear, and even your friend Ian McGilchrist has a wonderful section in his book, The Matter with Things. I think it's in part two, just about how bad machine metaphors are when we're talking about life. And so I think when you use AI, Tim, there's just so many connotations that fall short of the absolute unbounded mystery of human consciousness, of animal consciousness, of nature. And so when you say something like the universe is like an AI system, well, first of all, an AI system is something that has emerged, first of all. So it's probably not a great comparison on an epistle. I mean, to my
Well,
view.
you're going to have any analogy is for the universe is going to be tricky because it's going to
You're
be
right.
within the universe, whatever your
Yeah,
analogy is.
yeah, but there's could be some better than others.
Of course, and look, we'll move beyond the AI analogy. It's just right now it says numbers of things which are really handy, and I do repeat numbers of times. Look, I'm not saying the universe is a computer, and I'm not saying this is the
But
way
you
it
do
is.
say that. And
What
what I'm saying, I'm not saying what I'm saying right now is I'm saying perhaps this is an emotional react.
Yeah,
Like
I
I'm
hear you.
self-aware.
I
I'm
hear you.
self-aware enough.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
I'm not saying this is an argument. I'm saying that the
I
way
get it.
that triggers thoughts for me, it takes us down. For me, it has connotations that, I wouldn't ascribe to our experience of consciousness, but I think
And you're
that's just the
right.
emotional, the philosophical
You're right.
part of that. Okay. So just that's my I'm telling on myself first and now let me now tell you philosophically what I think,
Okay.
just now that we've gotten the emotional piece of that out of the way.
Let me just say before you do that, because I think I
Yeah,
want to pay
please.
attention to it, is that because I tend to, I didn't use the AI metaphor lightly because I've never used it before, and and I used it totally as a metaphor simply because it allows us to come to some kind of conception, and everything I'm doing is just like the beginnings of something. I mean, it's really rough of going, look, can you AI, like you said, it comes from the bit, this or that. Well, that's kind of Taoism right there. I mean, my philosophy starts with Taoism and ends with Christianity, if you like. It's like, you know
That's
or
really good.
or it starts with Buddhism, the formless, and it
Yeah.
ends with, theism.
Yeah.
Um, and the what it does is it goes, look, can you see? We've learnt that from information we can mimic reality to quite a degree. Well, what if the reason we can do that is because it's actually picking up something about the actual nature of reality, and that therefore, and if we can see that, we can see how the universe can learn of itself. So it's not designed by an intelligence; it's the evolution of intelligence, and that metaphor uh, is a modern language which allows me to make those points quickly without wanting to go, look, of course we reach this level. It's not like my love for my wife is just a computer system. It's like nothing to do with that.
I know. You just please try to understand that that's what it brings up for me is that sort of, yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
agreeing. I think you're right.
Okay.
I know. Like Ian hates it. You mentioned Ian McGilchrist. I know Rupert Sheldrake hates it for the same reason. Because and what's happening with this is relates back to previously. It's because it's associated with reductionism. It's associated with it's really just this. But what I'm trying to say is never, ever, it's really just
Hmm.
this. I'm always going, and there's more. And the thing which is more, by definition, cannot be reduced to what is lesser because it's more. And so the fact that it's reached up through our human psyche, the soul, and God, it's not like it's just information. No, that's the common language. The common language is it's information, but it's not just information. It's now this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, having put aside the more of emotional reaction of that. I think we can talk about the
Yeah.
philosophical reasons why I don't like it.
Yeah.
And I think they stand on their own. I don't
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
mutually, exclusive or anything like that. I think that they both stand on their own as their own point.
Cool.
But the more important is, are the ideas robust,
Yeah.
But I always think, we don't, as philosophers, we don't have to act like every thought we have is this sturdy, fire tested thing, and we never have any emotional confirmation that I mean, I think to be able to include that in our conversation is a part of the epistemic humility that you talk about in your pod book. You talk about, I think it's part seven or part eight, where you talk about being this open system. And to me, part of being this open system is that as human beings, being willing to have these relational conversations where we're not just trying to appear as if we have some sort of ironclad position, but that we're able to hold it lightly and be like, this is my reaction to that. And so that sort of playful awareness to me is, I think that's where we need to head as philosophers. I think this humility and this place of growing together and becoming together. Yeah. Um,
Totally right. Beautifully put.
awesome.
Beautifully put.
So
All
so
right. Now I'm emotionally prepared for why you disagree.
thank you. Okay. So when I think of AI, I think of something that's been created, like an algorithmic structure that's been created by a human being, and it can it's evolved to this really like ChatGPT, for example. These language models are pretty amazing, what they can do. But there are parameters that are set, and the parameters, they're at the foundation, we do have the ones and zeros and the parameters that have been set before you get it in motion. And then once it's in motion, it can work within a parameter space. And it can be a super flexible parameter space, but it still works within a parameter space. Even when you referenced the model that used very minimal programming and created life, right, through this AI model or through this learning model, it still had like 8 different rules or something like that. And so my point to you is that somebody put the rules in place. There was a creative human being that created a model, and within that model, which is at its base deductive, because ones and zeros are, at its base it's an if and then a then, if this then that. But once it gets going, it can do all sorts of different things, right? So the problem with your metaphor, in my opinion, philosophically, is that we only have reference to our ability to put those parameters in motions, but we don't know how the parameters were put down in the first place for the origin of the universe. So that's where you have, I think, more of a powerful argument for something like God or an ontological consciousness or something, because everything that we have reference to, and this argument has been made by dozens and dozens of people. It's the argument about intelligibility, right? And it says, the universe is intelligible. It has a structure. It has coherence. It's not just chaos and randomness. It seems to, we can talk about entropy and so forth, but at the end of the day, there is a coming together. There's a cohesiveness, and everything we have reference to in man-made terms in creation has a creative origin, an inventor, a collaborative creative process. And so what my fear is, if we put non-creativity before creativity, I see an oxymoron, right? To me, I see it's like, oh, the universe accidentally learned how to be creative. And to me, that's the limit of an AI analogy. So that's my best way of putting it right now.
Okay. Yeah. No, I hear all of that. So there's the pod book's unfolding. I'm still recording it. And chapters that have just come out, but only not public, and they won't be public for a few weeks, but are about exactly this. So I'm going to try and say it real quick, with the danger that it's incoherent, because it's quite tricky, but I will do my best. It looks to me like what we've seen from physics and is that let me start with the problem with what I have with what you're saying. So first of all, I think the universe is creative all the way down. I don't think it arises with human beings. I think it's what fuels the evolutionary process right from the start is passivity, creativity, and sustainability. So repetition.
I need to write that down. Hold on, for my own sake. Passivity,
creativity, and sustainability. So that past patterns repeat, but always in a new way. Because they're coming into new relationships, which is why every moment is a different moment, which systems are in different relationships, and in complex systems like us, the systems within us come into different relationships. That's what happens when we have a new thought, anything new. So that it's never it's always creative as well as repetitive.
But you must get what I'm saying. How do you have creativity without a creator? You must understand. Okay,
of course, because that is the question that has dominated human thought up till Darwin, I would say. And the great revolution with Darwin was the idea that you could have the evolution of intelligence rather than there must be something more intelligence that creates it, or there must be the evolution of the process of creativity rather than them. So I would say not created, but the evolution of creativity, not intelligent design, but the evolution of intelligence. And that the problem is for me, and I'm criticizing myself here, is if you go, well, there must be something before, you haven't answered anything. Actually, you've just gone, I've explained the mystery of the universe with an even bigger mystery. There's this other thing which exists, and that's the whole theological problem and there's all sorts of other problems, of course, with God at the beginning. But that's the philosophical explanatory problem. It's like, well, okay, but you haven't answered anything really. You've just gone, well, what created that? Or, no. So what I've tried to do is go, okay, can we devise an understanding which fits with everything we know as best we can, which doesn't have that problem? So what I'm suggesting is that the first level of emergence is what we study with mathematics. Now, it's not mathematics. Mathematics is the language with which we understand it.
Thank you.
But it's the primary archetypal relationships, like the architect's plan of the universe, or not? No, that's wrong. More like the archetypal relationships, and so that one of the great mysteries, of course, that physicists have often got into is like, why does maths work so well for physics? Why? And I suggest it works so well because actually maths is the fundamental relationships. And
is it the relationship, or is it the way we describe the relationship?
Well, maths is a language, but what it's describing, let's use the word for what it's, otherwise we haven't got a word for it. But the maths is describing, so let's say maths, or the thing that maths describes, and geometry, all of that, is fundamental relationships. Now, in this way, what I'm saying is quite akin to Plato, actually, but I don't see them as transcendent, or Pythagoras. Pythagoras was the guy who first got this idea. But I don't see them as transcendent, I see them as foundational. So, and there's a lot of people experimenting. Oh God, I've forgotten his name right now. It's going to come to me in a second. But there's various physicists who are exploring similar ideas, and I've got a more philosophical version. Now, so the levels, if you just very quickly, would be like, okay, so there's a level we study with maths, and just in passing, there's a huge problem in philosophy. You're probably aware of it, Ryan, which is what the hell is it that we're studying with maths? Because it looks like a language, but it turns out to be something we discover. So we find a prime number, it just is a prime number. We didn't make it one, it just is. And so it looks like, and talking to professional mathematicians in my What is Life series, one of them said, look, every professional mathematician I know is a Platonist. They think numbers are real. And I was like, really? This is a long time ago. Really? What the hell does that mean? And then started to go, oh, I see what it means. This is the first level of emergence, and that's why I say the one is two. I mean, what we mean by undifferentiated oneness is relational. And then from that, all these relationships. and then that will give rise to a probability, quantum physics. We can get into that level, and then matter, and then life, and then psyche, and then God. So far, maybe there's something beyond God. I have no idea. The but what I want to say to address what you're saying, and I'm sorry I'm doing it so quickly, and hopefully not too confusing, is that what you see with, if you've got if you've got this or that, it can give rise, you can see it giving rise to all of the more complex relationship of number, which is like a blueprint for what's going to happen in terms of, geometry is like the blueprint for space, and sequence is the blueprint for time, and all that sort of thing. This has all been pointed out by Pythagoras. I've stole all of that. But you've also got the possibility of something being random. So what I see at the beginning, and I've nicked two words from the ancient Greeks here because it works for me, is the idea of logos and chaos. And
Agreed.
Pardon?
I agree with that.
So the logos would be all of the necessary relationships which we see in maths. It can be no other way. 2 and 2 is 4. If you know what the words mean, it's just true. 261 just is a prime number. If you know what the words mean, it's just true. There's nothing you can do about it. There are 5 platonic solids. You can't have a cube without a square. These are just necessary relationships. And then there's chaos, which is contingent. So you could it could be a 1, could be a 0, and then more and more complex. And it's going to be the relationship between the necessary and the contingent on the level of information, which is going to give rise to a probabilistic universe. Because probability maths is fixed. You throw a dice, there's 1 in 6 chance it'll be a 4. That's it. It's fixed. But which one will actually be thrown? That's contingent. So that you've got that combination of something which is, and that's going to create, that randomness is going to be conditioned into creativity, and the fixedness will become passivity.
Okay, now we're getting really close to the ontological, perhaps differences and similarities that we have. So to that logos, I would ascribe what I call consciousness, but I don't mean by consciousness metacognition, which is why I said.
What do you mean by consciousness?
Yeah, let me get into that.
Yeah.
To me, consciousness there's an intentionality in consciousness, and there's a phenomenality in consciousness. So you have the experiential and you have the directional. And to me, when you look at a cohesive process of becoming, the cohesiveness itself is something to be explained. And so what I hear from you is that, no, that's just what the universe is. The universe is a relational passivity creative process that is sustainable. That is what the universe is. It's becoming. That is what ontologically, it's this relational process.
That's the best description I can find of it. Yeah.
Is that fair? I mean, am I?
Well, yeah. I'm saying I'm not just asserting it though. I'm saying it for reasons, and it's a description, the best description I can find for a whole host of what I think are pretty good reasons.
Observation, yeah. So to me, the reason that it is that way is something to be explained, and there's this tension between creativity and creator that I feel like is pretty profound and worth fleshing out a little bit for a few different reasons. When I look at something like creativity, I see intelligence, I see cohesiveness, I see emergence, to be sure. But if I just say that this is happening, and maybe you can unpack the reasons why the reasons you just said, because you're saying I'm not just asserting it, in a circular way. I'm saying it for a reason, and that's great. And I'd like to understand that more. Because for me, if you don't have something like an intelligence or a primordial version of what I call consciousness, but you could call sentience, you could call directionality, you could call intentionality. The point is that it's a self-affirming agency, and it has an identity. If you don't have that, and then all of a sudden you have creativity, to me, that's not creativity. So like what Darwin, you mentioned Darwin. Darwin was Darwinian thinking doesn't ascribe creativity to natural selection, right? It just says that this is what happens. This is the process that occurs, but it doesn't ascribe it to be creative. It's just natural
I
selection.
hear what you're saying. Okay, then I can dump the word creativity. Choose a different word.
Will you
So,
tell me
so
what
I
what
because
would what would a
because what
different
I
word?
would say is that what you're meaning by creativity, and I completely understand why you would use it for that, because that is the common usage in human life, is an emergent of a process that goes right from the beginning. Now, I don't know what name to give that process, but it's one of, we could just call it emergence. That new things arise, new things
Okay.
are created, and maybe
Okay.
that issues force into what you would call human creativity.
Yeah,
So
I think that would be if you don't have the word creativity, then that
I'm happy to.
eliminates.
I'm happy not
Yeah.
to use that word. Quite happy. Yeah. So I
Okay.
would go. Look, yeah. There's a process of emergence which starts with the emergence of basic information. The information which is necessary could only be that way, which is what we study with maths. And then there's random information. Let's use the old Greek words, the logos, which is like the order and the chaos. And that relationship between that order and that chaos will give rise to what I think is a probabilistic universe, not a deterministic one, because it's passivity. Does repeat, but never in the same way, so that there's a constant movement between novelty and repetition. And
Mm.
I've used the word creativity for the novelty, but we could use a different word that will give rise to, and then sustainability is what carries on is what can form a relationship with the whole. And if it can do that, it will continue. And then that will develop and develop and develop and build on itself. And each new emergent will contain within it the past, which is why it's
Yes.
becoming richer and richer and richer. And you don't need anything at the beginning in that way. And I mean,
No agency at the beginning.
no, absolutely
Yeah.
not.
See,
See,
that's the difference. Is
I
I'm
would I
looking.
would say that mythic. What I mean by mythic thinking, to me, is pre-evolutionary thinking, and what that does is it's anachronistic. It takes ideas which are going to arrive on the human level and puts them on a level they don't belong. So intention, that's not going to happen for billions of years till we get
Mhm.
life. There's no intention in anything until we get life, and then there's intention. And so that doesn't belong at the beginning. Consciousness, that's, am I conscious of it? I'm conscious, the a molecule isn't, or whatever. That's going to arrive much, much billions of years later. And what human beings have done throughout history, quite understandably, with no knowledge of evolution, have gone, they've taken ideas from the human level and projected them back. So I create things, therefore there must be a creator. And he must be really smart because he's created all of this. And it's perfectly understandable. But then what's happened since then is we've understood, oh, we live in a process, and that process has gone from the simplest of things to the much more richer and
Mhm.
complex and multidimensional.
Yeah. And I see the process as being driven
I don't
by
think
an
we need that.
agency.
I don't
I
think
know
we
you don't.
need.
I know you don't. I don't.
I don't think we.
I think we've arrived at
Why do you think? Why do you think we
so
need?
I think evolution. So if we look at evolution, there's emerging scholarly work from theoretical evolutionary biologists and evolutionary biologists that are looking at how evolution happens with agency, right? So that even at the level of cells, at the level of smaller or less complex organisms, there's this agential process that, life is directional. There are preferential interactions,
I
and
agree with all
then
of that. I agree with all
right,
of that.
but then through the process of evolution, yes, does natural selection exist? But yes, but it's not the whole story. There's
I
a
think that's right. I think that's right. I mean, I think that we're massively underestimating the effect that these higher levels have on the lower levels because of this dominant reductionism. So I completely think that's right. But go back
okay.
now to the evolution of the periodic table and
Let
talk
me
about
start.
intentionality.
What I'm saying is that to start with life itself, I think you just to get an intentional organismic process where complexity accrues,
Yeah.
you need systems that have preferential interactions. And when you start to talk about preferences,
I
senses.
think there are preferential systems right the way back, but they're
Yeah.
not intentions. I think what I think the universe is looking for. That's what I mean by sustainability. So
Hmm.
sustainability on the level of biology would be, natural selection. It'd be, can you surviving, and can you reproduce? But that obviously, as you're saying, doesn't apply for earlier on. But there's still homeoresis. A system has to be able to it's all process. So any system, any process has to be able to sustain itself. So
Yeah,
there is
that's what Kaufman calls that an autocatalytic set.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's already there. So that which is there in the physical world is there's no intentionality to it. It's just built into the very process of emergence, and then that will become, on the biological level, something much more to do with life and death, because there's no life and death before that, and so on and so on and so on. I think it will also lead to the immortality of the soul myself.
Well,
But
but the reason I think that that process of emergence does happen is because there's an integrative consciousness that in and of itself has an integrative identity that builds on what already exists through what you're calling passivity and then novelty. And I believe that you do not get to the level of integration and cohesiveness without an intentional nexus. And the reason I believe that is that because for me, if you just posit that this process of becoming exists, but you don't have a sufficient explanatory cause for why is a bad question, but what is driving that process? What's the reason there would be a logos instead of just a universe that dissipates into nothingness? I think that's an interesting question. And for me, when we look at the emergence of life, just like the hard problem of consciousness, I believe that there's also a hard problem of life. How does life emerge from non-life? Nobody has a solid answer to that question. There are theories. Some people think it's RNA, kickstarted the process. There are different theories that people have. There's that article that you referenced with the system, that the AI system that created models of life out of very small sets of rules. But it's still a question of, how do you get life out of non-life? How do you get consciousness out of non-conscious? How do you get sentience out of non-sentience? These are all problems that I have found to be intractable if you look at it just as a process.
so Ryan, how does see? All right, I'm going to say it sounds a bit mean. Okay, but I'm going to go for it because it's you, and I know you're my friend.
Okay.
It sounds like, I mean, firstly, I think we went through the consciousness thing. I don't think there is a hard problem of consciousness. I'm not really sure there's a hard problem of life. I think there's a problem of, how do we understand this amazing emergence that has got us here? So I think it's every level is like that. But it feels like the mythic understanding, which is what I think you're putting forward, is unless you have the magic wand, nothing, you can't explain anything. It's like, well, how's that explain anything? It's like, well, it's the magic wand. It's like
But I could say the same thing about what you're saying in terms of, it just happens. It's
so
just what it is.
Here's the difference. Well, this is the way I got to it, and why I rejected the other. Is first of all, what's the minimal assumption we have to make? And I think the minimal assumption we have to make is there's a process of becoming, and the basis of it is the one becoming two. It's information. That is as minimal as you could possibly get, and that from that we can begin to see, okay, and that's going to give rise to all those relationships we study with maths. It's going to give rise to one of the relationships we can study with math is randomness, and that informational vortex is going to give rise to the steady unfolding of anything. So, and we haven't needed the magic wand. We haven't needed to go, well, there's something before it, which we don't explain. What is it? Where did it come from? How has it got qualities? How is it having intentions? When I have an intention, it's like I had an intention to meet you with you. That required me to know who you are, to know what we were going to talk about. I mean, intention is an amazingly complex thing. How does it have consciousness? I am conscious now. I'm not at night. It's a sophisticated biological function.
You could have dreams and different
experiences. Sure, I'm conscious of my dreams, and then sometimes I'm not. So
Yeah, but
consciousness
sometimes
comes
you
and
can have a
goes.
dream without being aware that you're dreaming, right? You can like, right, you might recall 2 days from now you see something,
Well,
you see a
the things
little
I've
kid on the,
forgotten, sure.
yeah, but it's not
But you could,
this.
if I wanted to give you heart surgery, I would make you unconscious, and you would not know that I was giving you heart surgery. And then if you were conscious, you bloody well would know. So like that seems like it's something that comes and goes. It's to do with what we what we can process on a high, on this very emergent level.
We're back to the definitional issue again.
Yes. So
Yeah.
so if
So
we don't mean that, if we do, that's if that's a fundamental thing we how we talk about what it is to be conscious,
yeah, it
then it's
is.
like that. Then I need to push you on what do you mean then that this thing which is just there, which is consciousness, what does that possibly mean? I mean, consciousness means with knowledge. What does it mean, and what's an intention then? If it's not an intention like I have intentions, what is an intention? Because I can tell you what a human intention is, but I can't tell you what this intention is. I don't know. I don't know what it means.
Well, if you look at people like Michael Levin at Tufts University, it's becoming more prevalent to look at all biological systems as intentional, meaning
I
that
could agree with that. But
so
let's go back to the ground, the
but no, it's
pre-biological,
important. It's
pre everything.
important. It's important to flesh out the biological first,
Oh,
so
okay.
that
Sorry.
we can prepare the ground for
Sorry.
what is before that. But if we're not
Okay.
on the same page about where we are, even at this epistemological level, it's going to be hard for us to even
Okay.
have
Okay.
the same
I
language.
apologize. Let's do that.
It's okay. What I'm saying is that, okay, we can use a different word than consciousness, but what I'm saying is that experience, and like when you think of AI, okay, I don't assume that it's something that it's like to be a computer, and I'm
Yeah.
not just making this stuff up. This is work that has been done and
Oh, yeah.
established as
Yeah.
problematic ideas within consciousness studies.
Yeah.
And one of the problematic ideas within consciousness studies is how do you explain experience? Right. And that's where you get, Chalmers has the idea of philosophical zombies. You could plausibly, you could have, a human being that does all the same behaviors that you seem to be able to do, but there's nothing that it's like to be that human being. You could plausibly make it, Elon Musk could make a really great robot
Yeah.
that has this wonderful nuanced facial expressions, and it's so technically advanced. It can do the dishes, it can carry on a conversation, it can smile, it can laugh, and it will get to the point eventually where it's going to be hard to tell,
We're back to the hard problem of
is this
consciousness.
is this a person?
But
Uh,
you see why that wouldn't be a problem for me.
well, I'm getting go. I was fleshing out an idea, but you go first.
Okay, well,
Interject.
I'm more than happy to let you flesh out the idea. I just wanted to
No,
check that you
no,
realised.
please go. I want to
So
understand.
again, for me, it's like again same thing. It's like that we can mimic something. Is like, well, we're just mimicking it. I mean, that's what we do with computers, artifacts generally. But that what I'm suggesting is that experience is absolutely an emergent level. Everything's relational. So what is this? Well, this right now, what exists for me is the relationship between me and my ability to sense the world
Mhm.
and the world. And that's what exists as far as that's it, this relationship.
Yeah, but the
And
problem is what you mean by me.
okay,
And
well, I can tell you exactly what I mean by me. I
yeah,
can tell you
yeah,
exactly what I mean by me. I mean that there's an evolving passivity system, I would call it, information system, intelligence system, you call it whatever you like, where system doesn't mean AI, system just means a unified whole, something that's integrated.
sure.
That Tim is one of those, and he is the one arising as this particular system in which everything within him is relational, but he is also an integrated system in relationship with everything else, and that
Mhm.
gives him this level of relationality, and that conjunction is this. But the conjunction of the world and a bat would be different, and
Yes,
that's what experience is.
but
And that goes right the way down and dims out until it's there's no consciousness involved in it, and there's just relationality.
okay. So what I'm attempting to explain is that within a human being, there are multiple subsystems psychically all the way down to cells. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And you could call it like a layered architecture,
Yep.
a layered architecture. At each
Very nice.
layer, the systems have different goals.
Yep.
Okay. And that as you go up in layers, the higher systems have some level of control over the behavior of the lower systems, but not total.
Yep.
So, if I get cancer,
Yep.
I can be at this system up here, but I don't necessarily have control over stopping the
Yep.
replication of the
Yep.
cells. But that cancer has its own system,
Yep.
and that system is replicating with its own goals. Now, I choose consciousness as a multiple entity, not as a singular entity, where all these different systems compete, cooperate, and tolerate one another, all the way up to the architecture of the personality, where you've got different subtraits to somebody's
Sorry, you're going to have
personality.
to. I was
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I'm
No, no,
getting
no.
there.
I just that bit I didn't understand what you
I,
said.
oh, did you miss what I said, or did you just not
I think I
understand
missed it,
what?
or both. Both. I
Okay,
just need you to say it
so
again.
okay,
I got
so
all the layers. That was beautifully put.
Okay, so in these layers,
Yep.
they each have their own goal-directed behavior.
Yep.
And to me, there is an explanatory power to seeing sentience as a part of these different systems, but not in the same way that you and I discuss consciousness at the metacognitive layer. It's a primordial, instinctual process of becoming and relating, but that process within it has an identity that has an experiential basis. So we could ask the question, going back to Thomas Nagel's, what is it like to be a bat, right? He says,
Yeah. Yeah.
presumably there's something that it's like to be a bat. My inability to imagine what it's like doesn't negate the fact that there could be something that it's like to be a bat.
Mhm.
And that there could be something that it's like to be these different subsystems, even though at my level of architecture, at this metacognitive higher layer, where I really only have access to these different subpersonalities, these different subtraits, these different modes of interacting. Like right now, I'm in a philosophical mode of interacting. When I'm with my wife later, I'll be in a different relational mode of interacting. But they do have consciousness, they do have experiences. I'm saying that those experiences are part and parcel of what it is to be a biological entity. Now, that is not a just automatic premise in biology or theoretical biology. There are many who argue that consciousness only happens at the higher levels of our architecture, of our biological architecture. So it doesn't really happen until you get up to the layer of personality, for example. Then all of a sudden you're conscious. Now, if you don't like the word consciously, we're having trouble with that word. We got to find different ways to relate to each other, because what I'm talking about is that there's simply something that it's like, and it's an intentional system that, that it,
I think that's clear.
okay. So this intentional system is a part of life, right?
And
So now the
okay.
question would be,
Okay.
okay, so how do you get an intentional system out of a non-intentional system? And this will take us all the way back to ontology, in my opinion. And
Mhm.
so my argument is that you have to have the seeds of intentionality in order for that to carry over,
Mhm.
and that it cannot just pop out of a relational process. I don't believe, and if it can pop out of a relational process, the devil is in the details. And I think it's also good to explain, how does this psyche emerge out of these molecular constituents in relational processes, right? And just saying that it emerges because the universe is a passivity system doesn't, to me, do the work that it needs to do. So where I would push your thinking, and
I'm
we,
not just saying that, Ryan.
I know you're not, but
Okay.
just, I know you don't think you are, but I'm saying from my perspective, where I'm pushing your thinking as
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
pushing my thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Where I'm
Yeah.
pushing your thinking is, I have no idea how you're getting the actual arising of what I'm talking about in these biological systems out of relational process dynamics that are non-conscious or non-sentient or non-intentional, whatever you want to call it. I don't see how it's happening. And that question, to me, has not been solved by anybody in philosophy, and is still a hotly contested debate. That's why I said at the beginning, I think your theory is aesthetically brilliant, but what I don't understand is how do you make the premises true? Well, to me, it just seems like you're making observations. You're saying that there's this process of becoming, and as the process gets more sophisticated, more complex, now we get this. I think that's a just it's a position that you're putting forward, but I don't understand how it's happening. And you could say the same thing to me, to be fair. And you have, by the way,
I,
you said how is the intentionality just there? So we're both pushing each other, but I'm saying I can push you in the same way, and I just don't I don't think it's as plausible. And the reason that I'm attracted to ontological idealism myself is because you basically dissolve the hard problem, which you're claiming to do, but I don't see how you've done it yet.
oh, you don't
Because
see that?
I
We
don't
should.
see how you've dissolved it yet. What I'm saying is that in ontological idealism, all you have is psyche, and you have these informational networks within consciousness that have their own identity and they have their own bounded parameters, but they're within this greater field of consciousness so that there's literally no hard problem that exists.
So psyche was there.
Not in the it's not that
Psyche's always there.
my psyche wasn't there,
No, obviously
but a psyche.
a psyche. And what was that psyche?
To me, that would be what you could call God or creator.
But
or,
what is so when you've got let's go back to the hydrogen, which is not the beginning, but let's go for okay. So the universe, as far as we know, is hydrogen right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're saying, yeah, that's psyche.
I'm not saying the hydrogen is psyche. I'm saying that the universe exists within the confines of what we could categorically call psyche.
Now, okay, so what I experience as I everything that I start and end with is my experience, not just mine, but human experience. So what I mean by psyche is it's I'm experiencing it right now, and it's images, and even and if you dive into it, the shamanic power plants and meditation, or it's just like it goes wow, but it's all created from the novelty of the bringing together what are in essence copies of sensory sound or images. Well, if there have been no sensory images or sounds, what does psyche possibly mean? Given that's all we ever experience of the psyche.
That's just a limit of how you define psyche.
Well, I'm saying exactly what I'm saying. So I'm saying I root my definition to something very definite that you're experiencing, I'm experiencing, and anyone listening to this can experience. So when I say psyche, I know exactly what I mean. What do you mean by psyche? What qualities does it?
Well, I defined it earlier when I tried to define consciousness. I said it was an intentional, self-affirming radiance that is integral, that integrates. So that it
okay, so nothing to not this,
intentional,
not images and something else completely.
Well, that would be like asking, like, what is it like to be God, right? Like, I'd be like, well, I don't know what it's like to be God, but I can posit the probability based on an argument structure that there is something at the beginning. My ability to explain its definite qualities, are going to be based on my ability to articulate the argument, but probably not completely accurate, because it's just like even like you're saying with your model, you're like, okay, like this is my best way of explaining the origin, and here are the words that I've come up with: passivity and sustainability and relationality. I mean, I'm doing the same thing with consciousness. But I'm saying, yeah, of course, I'm not going to be able to describe what it's like to be a universal spirit, but I can certainly posit
spirit. What does that word mean?
Well, I've basically said psyche as the psyche of the universe would be universal spirit, right? So that's what
psyche, spirit, God, they're all the same thing.
No, psyche. Nope. Okay. Think about if the universe indeed has a soul, right? That doesn't.
What does that mean? What does that mean? I don't know what. I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
So if you look at soul and psyche in Greek, I mean, these are synonymous.
Yeah. But what does it mean to say the universe has a psyche or a soul? What I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to.
No,
I genuinely don't know what these words mean anymore, because for me, I define everything. I like to tie it down and go, oh, I mean that, and you can get it through experience.
Okay.
And I don't know how, I don't know, and I know that you've got a psyche, it seems to me. I know I'm experiencing psyche. I know we can check that out together. But to say that there is a psyche of the universe that's there when it's just hydrogen, I
Well,
don't
that's
even.
also a problematic presupposition because it depends on your view of time and how you square with the different physics of the theoretical physics on time. So that we can get into that. But essentially, what I'm saying is that so my soul is an individualized life force, an individualized imagistic self-aware system of intentionality that is derived from what you would call the supersoul. But instead of putting the supersoul at the end, I put the supersoul at the beginning. That's the difference. And
Sure.
I'm saying that a psyche is a self-affirming, intentional, phenomenal, integrative radiance. It's a self-affirming nexus that has intentionality and phenomenality, and it's integral. That's where you get logos. What I'm saying is that the logos is directional. It's not just there. It has a directionality. It has an identity. The logos has an identity. The logos is a consciousness, and it has properties of experience. Now, if you ask me, what is it like to be the logos, Ryan? How could I
Oh
possibly?
no,
That's
I'm
like,
not. I'm not trying to play those sort of games.
yeah,
So I completely agree with you that everything it can't just appear from nowhere. So that when we talk about when you went down those levels and when well, you got life and you got consciousness, and it's like so I would agree with you completely that everything we've got now is an emergent of something that came before, and that you can trace it back and back and back and back, and every quality, like intelligence, like consciousness, like sentience, everything goes back and back and back and back and back and back and gets more and more foundational and simpler, and will become not then arise at something super complex,
yes.
but arrive at something
Oh,
super simple.
and I need to tell you one more thing. Part of the reason I believe what I'm saying is because of non-locality.
Okay.
So to me, if the universe is fundamentally non-local, I don't know
Yeah,
if you accept that or
I
not, but
do. Yeah.
that's okay. Um,
Foundationally and non-local, let's say. Yeah.
okay. So this is the best I can do with the argument is that as soon as you lose locality, you lose the sense of time that we experience on a human phase. Now, if you want to unpack time from a different theoretical direction, that's an interesting conversation. But as soon as you have quantum entanglement,
Hmm.
it's like things moving faster than the speed of light. It's like, okay,
Hmm.
time as we understand it has
Hmm.
disappeared.
Hmm.
So if you lose the time, if you lose locality,
Hmm.
to me, that super psyche is non-local, and we are
Hmm.
local psyche. So to me, the local psyche is this. It's like a fractured, it's a whole that emerges from another whole. But to me, it's like if you've got this super psyche, and we know that reality is fundamentally non-local.
Hmm.
To me, it makes sense to look at solving what I think is still a hard problem of consciousness, even in the way that you've described it so far. You can solve it through looking at the non-local origin as a superpsyche, a panentheistic
Hmm.
consciousness. That's the best that I can
And you've done a great
articulate.
job. And as I'm sure you know, if you read any of my books before Soul Story, then we'd be saying exactly
I'm
the same thing.
sure. Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
so I completely get why you would say all these things, and so I would agree with you. I think space is an emergent quality. I think time is, I don't think the mathematics is temporal. I don't think it makes any sense to say, how long does it take 3 to become 4 or a square to become a cube? It's like, no, time is going to come later. Space is definitely is going to come
But even
later.
that's a funny statement.
Well,
Time is going to come
emergently
later.
later. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's temporal language, and that's
yeah.
part of the problem is that we use language from the wrong level. So I would say emergently later, not temporally later. And emergently later, you can say, well, a square requires a line, so it's emergently later,
Yeah,
but you can't say it's temporally later. And
yeah.
so I would agree with you. I think the question, but I think the I think this is what's happened to human beings actually historically, is that human beings have experienced the super soul God, the
Hmm.
super system, which I think is emerging through us, but and then they've gone, oh, this must be the source of the universe. And it's a confusion of the ground and the sky, if you like, where it's going and where it's come from. And I think on the ground, the Buddhists are right. It's empty. It's formless. And by formless, I mean formless. No form, no intent, nothing. Formless. And that formlessness and the whole insight in Mahayana Buddhism, samsara is nirvana. Nirvana is samsara. The formless is forming. And that, so it starts with the formless, which is forming in the simplest way imaginable, which we see in, say, Taoism, the yin yang, or Kabbalah, or certain forms of Gnosticism, but not as a fall from above, as it were, getting lesser and lesser, but an
Hmm.
emergence, an evolutionary emergence, where it's starting with the simplest of things, which you can only describe as best you can with languages we're trying to develop with mathematics, through to what will become quantum physics, where you see the emergence of time and then space, to give rise to matter, which is where systems which are purely purely informational, they have no physical existence, suddenly do, because they come into relationship with each other, and then that relationality is going to just become more and more and more rich and multi-leveled. And that
Yes.
every quality that we're talking about, such as being conscious, and the thing we haven't touched on is the rising of the psyche. And I think that's the bit that you're going, yeah, but you still haven't solved the hard problem of consciousness, which is, where does this thing we're experiencing right now, which isn't material, where does that come from? But I don't think it's because it's at the beginning. I think it's a very emergent level, and I think it's the information on that level is images from the sensory world, and the primal images are going to form what Jung called the archetypes, and the primal ideas are going to be like the archetype, and then that is going to become a whole dimension, and that's what
But
spirituality has been exploring for all this time.
okay, but the other interesting question is everything up to the point in your theory of sensing and experience like let's say experience any experience, and then you get to psyche, you go from sensing and reading as a cell to psyche images as a dog or as a human or a raven or whatever it would be. Anything up to that point can be scientifically explored, through the lens of experimentation, through the lens of falsifiability, through the lens of creating different structures to analyze this. And then all of a sudden you're jumping from the world of like a falsifiable experiment, and now all of a sudden we're in this more ephemeral space where sure you can posit it and you can say that it's plausible for these reasons, but you do make a jump in the structure of your argument epistemologically there, and I just don't see what the threads are that are holding it together. And
Okay,
so
okay,
there's a gap, there's an
okay.
explanatory gap, and I want to know, okay, Tim, that's
Well, let's fill the gap.
beautiful. Let's fill the gap. Yeah.
So look, yeah, I mean, obviously, every
I mean, but
single.
first of all, am I being fair? Is that a fair
Well,
criticism?
you're being fair about what you see. I don't think it's
Yeah.
true, but I think
Okay.
it's.
Okay.
I think you're highlighting an area which has to be addressed,
Okay.
and I am aware that on every single issue, I'm addressing this as a philosopher, not as a scientist. Or, I mean, I'm quoting, physics and information, but I'm not a physicist. I mean, I can explain why physicists have said that, but for instance, and I'm aware that because of the nature of passivity, what I would call passivity, that the areas where it is most established are the lower levels, which are so repetitive that it's given rise to the idea of determinism, even though I think that's wrong. So,
Okay.
because it's, and then as soon as you get to life, it's much harder. When you get to psyche, it's really what I would call creative or emergent. So, I have never said this quite like this before, ever. So it's very hard now to do repetitive experiments on our conversation and so forth. So you have to
Another
use,
another way of asking my question, and then I'll let you go,
yeah.
is do you agree that there is a gap
No,
to
I
fill?
think it's all one process of emergence. Now there are, and within
No, I
that,
know you think that, but I'm saying, do you agree with me that in your argument, there's still a gap to be filled there for your own philosophy to
no,
develop fully?
no,
Okay,
no,
thank you.
I don't think so. I
Okay.
think that if you stand back far enough, you can see, like, I'll use the classic ones. You can go information, matter, life, psyche, or sentience and consciousness, psyche. And you can go now, but each one is actually a gradient, which is just like new things, new things, new things, new things. So the question then becomes like, how can you explain where this whole domain, which is the one I'm absolutely focused on, because my main concern isn't any of the stuff we've discussed. My main concern is, how do we understand spiritual experience? What is that? And what I'm suggesting is that the psyche arises as a sense,
Hmm.
and that we have all of these senses with which we pick up information, and we've developed the ability to focus, which is what it is to make that conscious. So there's been processing happening the whole way through,
So
always.
does the universe have a like does the basic ontology have a sense? Does the
No,
relational no,
no.
okay.
Sensing is a very
Sensing comes later. Okay.
emergent level of relationship. So the basic senses, like touch first, then picking up light, and then picking up sound, all of that stuff.
But you must
Taste.
see you've jumped from quantitative to qualitative in
It's
your
all
argument.
qualitative.
Yes, in terms of our ability to explore it, but
No, no,
not in
no. It's all,
terms
but
of
everything. Every form is a certain quality. Everything. The oneness of being, I would say, is being qualified by every passivity system. So it's taking on a certain characteristic, and that characteristic is what's governing the repetition that makes it what it is,
Mm.
and that
So
everything is
you don't
made
say
in its past.
qualitative, like when I say qualitative, I mean you've jumped from the world of, experimental exploration to the world of experience itself.
That's because I'm saying it's all relational. Now, the way you might study it will change, of course, because it's different, completely different. I would say often I would see number, for instance, as
Mm.
primal qualities. And this is Pythagoras again, really, but it's like they're the fundamental ways of qualifying the limitless potentiality of being, which is formless and therefore could be formed into anything. So something which could be anything has
But
become
before there was
this.
consciousness, there was no one to qualify them.
Well, no one's doing anything. Doing is not going to arise for quite a while.
Right. So I'm saying that before that, before in your model, before consciousness emerged, it's not like there were qualities that were qualitatively experienced. They were just stuff was happening. No one
I,
was there
I,
to experience them.
exactly. That well, you've got systems interacting. So you've got
Yeah.
a chemical system will interact with another chemical system in a certain way, and that will lead to something novel, perhaps, or it will lead to a repetition of what you would expect. And that is what has led to the evolution, very slow, of the physical universe, comparatively slow. And that as soon as you get to life, you're going to, the system has had evolving intelligence, if you will, not intelligence like us, but our intelligence is going to come from that. It's a very emergent level of that. That is going to speed up. So now it's got a new way of doing it. And then once it becomes conscious, it can really speed up. And then once it's got psyche, and that's what we're going to discuss, then it can really speed up. And what's happening with,
When you say speed, what do you mean?
I mean, the amount of novelty.
Okay.
So the amount of novelty that's going on in the psyche right now as we speak is enormous. But my body's
Yeah.
not evolving. And the room stayed pretty much the same. But on the level of the psyche, I'm evolving right now with you. That's how exponential the curve has got since we've become conscious and developed psyche. So that
Yeah.
the whole process of emergence is just going through the roof right now.
Yeah. We just have such a like at this point where you see the one process where you describe the one process. It's all just one process, and
Yeah,
all of a sudden you've got, at some point you've got sensing, and then another point you've got psyche, and
yeah,
it's all just one process.
yeah.
I, we have such a fundamentally conceptual difference in how we see the point of transition.
Well, I think every
That
point of transition will be different.
Agreed, but as soon as you get to something like phenomenality, meaning any type of experience, any type of identity, any type of
Well,
intentionality, in your
let's go through
model,
that. Let's take each one of those. So what was the first one?
phenomenality,
So you mean actually having experience?
just any experience
Okay,
whatsoever.
so conscious experience, or
Just it could be as simple as
so you got a slime
it could
mold.
be as simple as a paramecium. Yeah,
So
exactly.
you got a slime mold. It's
Yeah,
reading.
yeah.
It is,
Sensing,
we in the
presumably.
normal use of the word, it would say it's not conscious, but it's alive, and it's reading its environment. It's learning. It's got no neurology, but it's able to learn, and it's interacting with its environment in a very primitive way. By the time you get to a mouse, you can see, whoa, that's moved on a long way now, and now it's sensing the environment about it.
Sure.
It will go into a sleep state where it's unconscious and vulnerable. It will be in a waking state where it is conscious. It's moving between those things for a reason. It focuses attention on what seems to matter. It has intentionality. Why? Because once you've got life and death, systems are very fragile because they're so complex, which means two things. One, it has to avoid dying, and it has to keep itself alive and reproduce. Those are the things it needs to do within the biological sphere. And that means some things matter more than others. And that will create consciousness, focus on what matters, and it will create intentionality. This is and so the evolutionary process will benefit everything that does that better. And so it's got better and better and better and better at sensing, at being able to focus, and about having intentions. But all of that intentionality is happening. That's happening unconsciously, like it happens nearly mostly for us. But what's happened for us, and probably many other forms, but definitely for us, is that we have learnt to sense ourselves. That's the way I probably could put it. So that you've got, just as every other sense is relational, a sense, which I call the psi sense, the psychic sense, is the ability to read the passivity system itself. And that's giving rise to images. And you can see that really early on, possibly as early as an octopus, where it seems to dream. We don't know if it does, but maybe it does. As soon as you've got dreaming, you've got a system which is creating images. So as soon as you see the dog doing this, oh, it's dreaming. So it has psyche. It's experiencing that imaginal world, which we experience right now, where we can imagine talking to ourselves, which is what thinking is. And that imaginal world, I'm suggesting, which will arise to begin with as systems just beginning to learn to sense themselves, has huge evolutionary advantage. And therefore it starts to increase and increase and increase. And now it is huge. And it's not just a little bubble around Tim's head. It's a whole ecology. Just like there's an ecology of biology, there's an ecology of psyche. And that ecology of psyche is what spirituality has always been studying. Because you can go out there
And
and
that's
see
why
about
you think it's mythic. Like it's mythic to put intentionality at the beginning for you
Yes.
because you're taking one category and misattributing it to another.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
It's anachronistic.
Yeah, I see that's where your argument is. So I think we're going to start going in circles here because my thought is that you've simply
If it's any consolation, Ryan, I'm utterly confident that for every 100 people that watch this, 98 will agree with you.
well, I don't that doesn't matter. I mean,
No, it doesn't. But
it doesn't really
should
matter.
it should be. I think what you're saying is a lot of it's a very, what you're doing is a very well articulated version. Let me praise you back for praising me. It's a very well articulated version of the current spiritual philosophical probably mainstream, actually, in terms of spiritual philosophical, and a lot of it's incoherent, but your version is definitely not. It's very coherent.
Well, thank you for saying so. Yeah, and I think if there was one takeaway that from one philosopher and friend to another, if you could take this kindly rather than as a jab, it appears to me that you've just solved the hard problem of consciousness by saying that it's not there. And
Okay,
maybe that's my failure to.
Let's have, we probably need to stop. I can feel that.
That could be my failure.
But I can't just
understand it.
Let's try one more time. Look, every single system in the universe is relating to its environment, whether it's a hydrogen molecule or whether it's, whether whatever level it's on, so that everything is related. Everything is reading and responding. Although on the lowest levels, you could just call that reacting, because it's the same thing. The reading and the responding is the same thing. So a chemical is reacting. So there's electrochemical relationships. They will evolve into once as life arises. So you've got much more bigger holons, bigger systems, super systems, and super systems. Once you get to that level, the level of relationality is now very, very sophisticated. And that will lead to the sort of thing you can see in a slime mold. Mm-hmm. Now, the learning was happening all the way through. I'm suggesting the whole universe has always been learning, but you've got to put it in inverted commas, because it's a very, very primitive version of what we mean by learning. It just means that patterns are being set up and repeating. Once you get to the slime mold, that setting up patterns and repeating is much more sophisticated, but still primitive to us. And it's in relationship with the universe. So that relationality will then become the ability to read information. Well, then you've got proto-experience. And once you've got that ability to focus, then that proto-experience, unconscious processing, is what's happening mostly for us. So when you go to sleep at night, you're still processing, obviously, because if the alarm goes off, you wake up. But you're not focused on it, you're not conscious of it. You're conscious of it when it goes off, and it wakes you up. And what happens when you wake up? You become conscious of the room, which you weren't conscious of before. So that what all of that is like incremental levels of the ability to read and respond to your environment. And then when that focus, when a system learns to put that focus on itself, and instead of just sensing the world, it senses its senses, it senses its own processing. Now you're going to get the beginning of the psyche. So all of that is one process of emergent relationality. There's no hard problem where something can possibly come from something else.
Yeah. I'm still in the same trouble, but part of it is just because I see, I mean, we kind of referred to it as arbitrary, almost like the way that we use the word consciousness, but it's really not arbitrary, because if I'm saying that, metacognition is this special thing that, we with an evolved neocortex can do, but, consciousness is running through all the systems all the time. What I mean is that there's different intentional relationships, there's different bidirectional interactions, there's different multiple consciousnesses going on, and my ability to focus at this layer of psychophysiological architecture is a very specific evolved mode of adaptation that I can do because of where my system is. But that doesn't negate the lower levels of directionality and intentionality. It's like when I'm sleeping, there's different levels of awareness that are waxing and waning, but that doesn't necessarily negate the plausibility of consciousness going on at lower levels of the system.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So maybe this is the place I'll end off, and you can just comment on, so you can have the last word. So to me, why did I change my mind? Well, there are a whole lot of reasons, because I thought the reasoning, because I couldn't see any good reason to think that there was a thing called consciousness that pre-exists. And the experiential reasons that I had, based on non-dual spirituality and so forth, collapsed on me, because I realized that they were actually interpretational. They weren't obvious at all. So that went. So then I'm faced with, here's one explanation, which is there's a thing called consciousness and intention, and that all exists, and it's giving rise to the universe in this way. Or there's this one that I'm developing, which is the fundamental story which science has been developing is right, and it goes back to the simplest things you can imagine, and it's just one process of becoming. And to me, and we can account for spirituality, and we can account for God and all of that within this narrative. So that I haven't lost all of that at all. I've just put it into a different context. And then for me, it was like, well, that one is just so much more elegant and requires so much less assumption. That's massively attractive. Can that work? And I think the more I've gone into it, the more I've been convinced it can certainly work better.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fine.
Did you finish your thought?
Yeah. My microphone very loudly.
I think you might have disconnected your microphone on accident, because now you're.
I'm back on, but
Okay,
I've
there you are.
spoken too much. I've done
No, that
enough.
was wonderful. Tim, I think in terms of process philosophy and exploring modes of becoming and complexifying, I just think there's so much agreement between us. I really love the creative process of becoming. I love Stuart Kaufman's language is the becoming of the biosphere and he talks about the new actual and the adjacent possible. And he talks about the swim bladder. You've got a swim bladder, and then all of a sudden there's an adjacent possible. There's a bacteria that could evolve, or a parasite that could evolve to live in the swim bladder. And this is just this unbounded, amazing space of creative becoming that just keeps cascading. And he quotes, I think maybe it's Heraclitus. He calls it the bubbling forth of the biosphere. It's a
Oh,
very lovely.
bubbling forth.
He's wonderful. But
Yes.
anyways, I think there's so much about what you're saying that is just so cutting edge, and I don't want that to get lost in the ontological differences. I think really epistemologically, once we're at the level of where we are here, we have a lot of agreement with a few differences in terms and a few differences in just how we articulate things. But most of the time when we kind of hash those out, we come back to the same page. And so for me, when I think of Tim Freak, I think of a fellow soul who believes in love. And what I think is so remarkable is how there's more than one way to get to the same place epistemologically, and that we've managed to converge in the beauty of relating to the universe. And I really want to honor that you don't see anything about your theory as negating the power of spirituality. In fact, if anything, it seems like it's empowering to you, the way that you've. Am I mistaken in saying that? Is that fair?
Oh, absolutely fair. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I mean to me the big thing was, to arrive at an understanding which could do justice to my experience of God.
yeah,
It's all service to God. That's all of this.
yeah.
And love is another way of saying the same thing.
Yeah, so there's no doubt in my mind about how shrewd the process of thinking that you're going through is. I think if we had a weekend to do a philosophy intensive and we could break out the deepest arguments we could pull forth, I think we would make some interesting progress. Unfortunately, in a podcast, it's hard to
I
it's
do
hard to
think
get there.
I think that's exactly right, Ryan. And it's been great. I mean, I love it because to be able to discuss these things with with someone like yourself is a real privilege. And I would love it, and you might come back to me with some ideas on this. And what I would love is, because I would love to find a way of languaging the actual debate between the idea that there's a consciousness and intention, and that's at the beginning, and what I'm saying, which is there's formlessness and the oneness, which just is. It's just the level. It's just being, the isness.
Mm,
To have a way of languaging that in a way that we don't get caught up in the different ideas about what consciousness means or what
yeah.
intentionality means, indeed. And I'm not laying that on to idealists, because I have the same problem. I created a problem for you when I used the word creativity, because you went, well, creativity means this to me, and quite rightly so. That's what we mean by creativity. And I was using a human level term for something pre-human. You picked up on it when I said, mathematically earlier. And it's like, it was like, well, hang on, it's pre-time. And it's like, yeah, you're right. That's right. I have to qualify
Yeah.
that. It's emergently early. These are really important things. But I would love it to be able to really home in on that idea of what's the ontological foundation, with a language which allows everyone involved and everyone listening to get the difference between the oneness of being and consciousness and intentionality,
Hmm. Yeah,
and
I
why
think that's
why
super
they're
important.
different.
Well, I think when I hear what you say about relationality, there's so much in that just lights me up, because I see just how robust that idea is, because there's really no such thing as a stagnant thing.
That's it.
And so there's a way in which I can wrap my head around your theory if I really push non-locality to its furthest conclusion, which which would then, and this is probably maybe a whole nother podcast, but it's an interesting way to push the conversation further is if we really take the idea literally that time and space don't exist fundamentally, then, you know, the becoming process of consciousness, it neither, you know, arrived or, you know, it didn't emerge in the sense of linear time that we see it. I mean, so in some way, the holistic intelligence of the universe could remain intact, and the holistic, you know, what I'm calling intentionality of the universe could remain intact all the way through, but it would require a major reconceptualization of time, and what do we mean by something emerging? What do we mean by before? What do we mean by origin point? So forth. But that is probably a conversation for another day. And there's, you know, brilliant physicists who have
I
been
seem to
trying to
remember
solve
we
these
did this
things.
last time, Ryan. I seem
Did
to
we?
remember that. I think what happened, the reason we ended up doing more was we had one conversation and we just felt like, well, that was great. We scratched the surface.
Yeah.
We'll have to have another one.
Okay.
So if you want us to have another one, whoever you are watching this conversation, just put it in the comments. And if we get enough people saying have another conversation, I bet you we could be persuaded, and then we will.
One of my favorite things you did was your conversation with, and it was public, so I guess I can say, with Andrew Cohen.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, you know, I mean, it goes without saying that a lot of spiritual gurus get enamored by power, and you know, there's a deceptiveness that can go on where they abuse that power, and you know, under the guise of spirituality, they become megalomaniacs, and it's, you know, very abusive. And you know, Tim, your humility and your ability to straddle those conversations and to really honor just how important it is that we're reasonable with our spirituality, that we don't fall into the trap of getting mythic about the way that we treat each other and using excuses. Your sense making around that is very palpable, and I've participated in one of your workshops, and you actually live what you teach. I think I might have lost you, but oh, well, anyways, I was
Yes.
just saying that you're living out, my experience of you is that you actually live what you teach, the way you treat people. So I just
Oh,
wanted to, you know,
thank you, Ryan. That's the most important thing there is, and all of that I'm exploring and why it's so. I mean, honest to God, I loved our conversation. I'm so grateful for it. I love, it's one of the things which I love is being with people where we can push it because no one's going to fall over, and some people are not like that, and I really get that, and it's just not appropriate. So to be able to sit back and go, right, let's just push the hell out of this and see what stands up. Because that's what I do to myself all day. I just do that non-stop. So to be able to do it in dialogue, that's the whole. Well, it reminds me of the great way that they teach in the Tibetan tradition, where you just see people. You know, if you've seen those, if you've seen that in the courtyards, where there'll be like people like us, and they're going da 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 da, and then the other one goes da da da, and they're like ooh da da da, and they're like, and they're really going for it. And of course, the old tradition in the West was the academy. And the academy, we still use the word, the academy, Plato's academy, was a grove of trees. And you would have a partner and you would walk through the academy and you would do this. You would push each other.
mhm.
And we've just done the original academy. And
There we go.
isn't that beautiful? So,
What a great rites of passage to do that with you. All right. Thank you for
so
having
go
me.
very, very well in everything you're doing. And I love you to bits. And
Love you too, Tim.
I hope we see each other more quickly in the next time than we have this time.
Okay. Wonderful talking to you.
All right.
Bye bye.